There's some other things about the Constitution. Originally, the president did not take office till March of the year after he's elected. So now you might wonder, why couldn't the president take office right away? But keep in mind, in those days, they'd hold the election on the second Tuesday in November. But it would take weeks and sometimes months before the president knew whether he was elected or not. In the case of Lincoln, well, it took several weeks before he knew. But in those days, they had the telegraph even. But when the Constitution made it, didn't even have the telegraph. So they would not know until maybe December whether or not the president was elected. And then they'd have to give the president time to go from where he was to Washington's. Now, Roosevelt had that changed. Today, presidents take office on January 20th. Again, we have the jet airplane. In Roosevelt's day, they had the automobile, the train, and the plane. Didn't have the jet, but they had prop planes, so they could get around faster. So the presidents take office a lot earlier today. Your congressmen and senators, again, they figured that they'd know the results of those elections more quickly than they would the national election. So those men would take office in January, and they still do. Now, at first, your senators were not elected by people. The senators were chosen by the state houses, the state legislature. Each state house of representatives chose a senator, and this was done until about 1913 or thereabouts, 1912, when another amendment said that senators were to be elected by a vote of the people. Now this one is still in the books, folks. The president is not elected directly by a vote of the people. The president is still, and always was, elected by the Electoral College. And each of these electors who are sent to Washington to choose the president can vote for whomever he or she wants to. Now, most of the time, they'll vote for the persons their people elect. So, but many of our presidents, including Lincoln and Wilson, and even our present president, Bill Clinton too, and Donald Trump, were minority presidents. They were not elected by a majority vote. And this was something I first learned in 1960 when I was 11 years old, and we were told that a candidate can win, and sometimes does, can win the popular vote and still lose the election because the president is chosen by the electoral. The purpose of the Electoral College, they did not want a true, pure democracy. Now, the Electoral College meant that your property owners, those the best of the people, chose your state legislators, and then the state legislators originally chose the electors. So you had your property owners, your legislators, and your electors, and then they chose the president. 3 layers of non-democratic vote. The idea was you would not elect a person by a direct popular vote of the people. Now today, the state legislators do not choose the electors. The electors are chosen by popular vote. Is that as clear as mud? I mean,
Well, it's still kind of confusing because, see, it sounds as if, like, unless you own land.
oh, that was back then.
Okay, so
Yeah.
today, so.
Yeah.
so how
Well,
is it-
today, that law is not on the books in any state. But go ahead.
I'm still kind of confused about the electoral votes. Like, how do you become an electoral person?
Oh, how you become an elector? Okay. The idea was, and this goes back to the way the Templars rendered it, the best of the people, in other words, the landowners, chose from among their number the best of them, the state legislators, and then the best of the state that chose the best people in their state, the electors. You know, the best of the people chose the best, who in turn chose another layer of the best, and that way only the very best of your people chose the president.
So,
You know, the best of the best of the best. So the electors, now today your electors are usually not prominent people, even though in the last election, Bill Clinton was an elector, and of course he voted for his wife. I'm not knocking it, I mean just simply, that's the way it was. But Bill Clinton was one of the electors. But today the electors are not necessarily the more prominent people in the state. And for the most part, they will choose whomever the people voted for. But they're still there. But again, the idea of property ownership scratched out from your mind now, that is not in the force anymore, but it was then. Because they believe that only property owners should vote because the property owners are more successful. They did not, all right, I have to clarify this. They did not want your poor, downtrodden, welfare people voting.
right.
They only wanted successful people to vote because they felt like only the more successful should be allowed to vote. And some of them might roll over in their graves if they could see welfare moms going to the poll. With all respect to those of you who might be welfare moms, I mean, you're here to try to better yourself, and I hope you do. But they would be really upset if they could see these kind of people going to polls to vote. Now, hey, I mean, all right, on a personal note, I grew up in poverty myself. And I recall one time I asked my mother, Mom, are we Republican or Democrat? Well, she said, your daddy's a Democrat and I'm a Republican, but we're neither one. Now this is my mother's family. We're neither one much of nothing. We don't vote. They finally started voting though. They voted in the 1960 election because a certain mandate was running they didn't like. So they finally started voting. But that came later. All right, anyway, that was now. The Constitution had to be ratified. All right. They wanted the three branches of government, and this comes from some of the English philosophers from years back, to keep each other in check. In other words, the Supreme Court was to be checked by the House and the Senate. And now, I've got to say this about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was not given the right of judicial review in the Constitution. They usurped it. They will talk about a famous case. And today it's gotten where the Supreme Court is the most powerful branch of government there is. And they make any decision they want to. And they don't have to abide by anything. They overturned the Constitution one time. Well, I might say when and how. The 15th Amendment specified that former slaves could vote, but the Supreme Court overturned it for about 100 years and specified that states could set up literacy tests or poll taxes, both of which were designed to keep former slaves from voting. The literacy tests were a big joke. Anyone with white skin would pass the literacy test. People with black skin would not. I mean, folks, I don't mean to open up old racial wounds, but I don't want to sweep this under the rug either. This actually happened. And as some of you nod your heads, both white and black, like you heard about this already. Well, yeah, this actually went on. For the Supreme Court actually overturned the clear meaning of the Constitution. That is scary because we give 9 men and women, 9 persons, and they can vote for something 5 to 4, and it takes 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of states to overturn it. And the Supreme Court decision has not been overturned by a constitutional amendment, folks, since 1912. The incident was income tax. Congress passed an income tax law. The Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional. A few years later, 3/4 of the states and 2/3 of both houses voted to amend it. But to amend the Constitution takes 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of the states. So it's very difficult to amend the Constitution. The Supreme Court, though, can make a decision 5 to 4, and it's the law. If that sounds like it's not democracy to you, it does to me too. The Supreme Court makes all of our moral decisions for us. Our elected officials do not make our moral decisions. All right. Now, ratifying the Constitution proved a little bit difficult. So as a result, from the very beginning, you had 2 parties formed. These 2 parties were called the Federalist and Anti-Federalist. The Federalists began pushing for ratification, the Anti-Federalists against. In the meantime, 3 men got together and put out some papers which they were hoping would encourage the Constitution to be ratified. They're called the Federalist Papers. And these 3 men were James Madison, who'd written the Constitution. Madison, let's see something, folk here, bear with me a second. Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. they put forth a series of papers in which they hoped would promote the Constitution. Now, a lot of persons who refer back to Federalist Papers. Did the original founders mean this or that? And they give us some idea of what the original writers of the Constitution actually meant. All right, I'll say this.
You said it's Madison?
Madison,
Jay.
John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. Yeah, Madison. Now, what did it mean? Okay, for instance, those three men were not ignorant men by any means, and they had to have known that in every school in America, every school, the Bible was read every day. And yet in 1962, our Supreme Court outlawed the reading of it. They were not going by the Federalist Papers, because the Federalist Papers nowhere mentioned outlawing it. And again, everybody knew, and these three men had to have known that it was read in every school every day. They had to have known it. But of course, like I say, when they took, and I saw my daughter on Sunday, and she was feeling very down. And I said to her, the public schools once worked. But when the federal government got involved, law and order went out the window. Am I saying that should have Bible reading and prayer in schools? I'll say this. I was in the schools for years before they outlawed it, and the public schools worked better then than they do now. And I'm on record, folk. I'm being recorded to say that. If I'm wrong, I mean, all I want to say about the issue is we've tried it for more than 50 years the other way, and the result is utter, total, reckless chaos. Any of you want to comment? I won't argue. I'll listen. Again, the only argument in advance is 3 words. It doesn't work. All right, anyway, but these men never said anything against it. And there's some other rights that were to come later. Of course, you might point out that these 3 men did not have strong views on slavery. Alexander Hamilton contradicted himself. I mean, I've read what he said about blacks. At one point, he said he believed that the black man's mind was just as good as the white man's, but at other points, he contradicted that. So he went back and forth on the issue. Anyway, these 3 men promoted the Constitution, and it took some time to ratify it. But eventually, the states one by one ratified it. Your book tells us which was the first one. Eventually, the last state to ratify was Rhode Island. I remember talking about that when I was in the 5th grade. Rhode Island, the smallest state, the last state to ratify. North Carolina was the next last. What was wrong with the original Constitution? Well, it did not include a Bill of Rights. But the persons who wrote the Constitution, all the states already have Bills of Rights, so that's not needed in the federal Constitution, because each state already has, well, only 6 of the 13 states actually had Bills of Rights in the Constitution, even though the rest of them had Bills of Rights in their laws, that were not part of the Constitution. But a lot of persons know we need a Bill of Rights in the central government to guarantee that this Bill of Rights will be the law of the land in any state that now is, or any state that comes in afterward. And this was, the states that ratified it late ratified it with a promise that a Bill of Rights would be added later, which they were. Now, Bill of Rights, folk, is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. All right. Amendment number 1 gives the right to petition the government, the right to peacefully assemble anywhere you want to, even though a lot of places you have to get a permit. Because the reason for getting a permit is so that the cops will know that they have to be there and enforce law and order. In other words, you just don't want to call a meeting and get 10,000 people when the police don't know that you're going to be there. But you have to get an assembly together, you have to get a permit. Get a petition. Anybody can petition the government, get people to sign that they favor a certain thing. And also, the First Amendment guarantees that Congress shall make no law respecting any religion. Yes, and now the next part of it. or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You know, Congress is not to prohibit the free exercise of religion, and this is being trampled on more and more as time goes on. The Second Amendment, folks, this one, we didn't talk about it much last week, but this one is making a lot of news. The Second Amendment gives citizens the right to bear arms. And we just had an election here in Georgia. If the other person had won the race for governor, the candidate promised to take away all privately owned guns. The Supreme Court not too long ago ruled that the Second Amendment still applied. Now, I'll tell you who was in favor of gun control. A man in Germany, back when my father was a young man named Adolf. This man named Adolf signed a gun control. He said, this will be an end to all crime. We have won a war, and he signed into law, and that way he was able to kill 15 million people, 6 million of whom were Jews. He killed every gypsy he could get his hand on. And folk, I'm really amazed that when I just signed papers, and I haven't signed one to you, at how many black men favor Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler sterilized every black man he could get his hands on.
Am I allowed to say it?
Yeah, you're allowed to say it. Go ahead.
So they actually, during the First World War, Germany had with the French people used people from Africa to fight the war, right? And so after that happened, they had a lot of mixed kids. And in order for them to not go to a concentration camp, they had to sign papers that they would be sterilized to not produce any more children with other German people. And they only had about 400 of them, and the last one died in like 2005.
Okay, all right. All right, and you're kind of verifying what I say, except that you're saying it was not a big issue, but there are only a few cases, but it was done. Yeah, it was done.
I guess just to return too, well, almost you both are saying something unique because think about it. Why would you want to now have these guys sign off saying, or even volunteer to be sterilized if you don't like them, or you don't like the fact that they're not pure blood or mixing their blood? You see,
Because their mothers were German.
Right, but you're still saying, I'm not arguing, I'm just throwing it out there. That's just like me saying, okay, in order for you to come to class, you can't do X, Y, and Z, you got to sign off on it. Still violating your civil rights or your ability. So you still saying Adolf Hitler, to his point, still was kind of like, he was on to something as far as automobiles and unifying, but as far as like, pure race, you're off by 100% because there's really no pure race around. We're all mixed with something.
So we are, yeah. Well, also,
That's just my
folk, I've got to bring it up. I've been meaning to talk about this, and I'll save it till we come to the part on Charles Darwin. All of us are descended from one woman, and all males are descended from one man. This is the National Geographic, proves it. That because of Y chromosome DNA shows that all men are descended from one man, and all females are descended from one female. And guess what? They call the female by a name that's not even allowed to be mentioned in today's public schools. You know, how do I know what they call the female?
Eve.
And they call the man
Adam.
Adam. Yeah. But again, I had my DNA check done many years ago, but they do, and I'm tempted to spend about $70 more bucks. The price of this has come down to have another test done, but there's no race. We're all one. All right, we hear that. But Hitler had to sit in the stands and watch while an American runner beat out all of his superior Aryan runners. The American runner was Jesse Owen, and you may know he was black. Then he had to watch while a black man, at first his boxer, Max Schmeling, defeated Joe Louis. But then they had a rematch. It was a close match. Joe Louis won the next 2 matches against Max Schmeling, the German boxer. Joe Louis, by the way, some of you know, he was black. And Hitler had to watch in awe while a member of one of his, and this is him, not me, inferior race, outran and outboxed his favorite boxers and his favorite runners. Oh yes, and Hitler, he emphasized sports, emphasized them strongly, and he was very upset in the 1936 Olympics when he had to sit and, anyway. But anyway, our founding fathers had a problem with this same thing too, as you might can guess. Now, all right, their book closes a chapter about, was the United States a Christian country? Now, a lot of persons at this time, now folks, this is straight out of your book, and I do not promote any of this at all, and I want to remind you something I might have told you. My wife is descended from a Jewish ancestor, so she's part Jew. They did not want Jews and Catholics to hold office. And they had laws on it, but most states at this time had laws on the books that Catholics and Jews could not hold office. And some of these laws stayed on the books till 1840. They also, going by New England, had laws that only church members could hold office. Now, these laws are no longer on the books. And we did have at least one Catholic president. We've had several other Catholics run for president, among them Pat Buchanan and John Kerry, both of whom lost. Buchanan never got the nomination of his party, but we've had Catholics run for president. This is now legal. In 1960, this was a huge issue among many voters. Now, I want to state that while church membership has not been required for vote holding office for probably 200 years in this country, in most cases anyway, most politicians have been church members. In fact, until 30 years ago, every politician was a church member, not because the law said he had to be, but because he knew in order to win elections, he'd better be. This is the case. And to this day, particularly, the candidates from one party tries hard to get the church vote because they know they cannot win the election without the church vote. I'm not going to name the party, some of them I guess, but there's particularly one party that really, really wants the church vote on their side, because oftentimes the church vote wins some elections. But again, that's by choice, not by mandate. A politician is still free to join or not. And lately, we've had at least one politician who claims to be an out-and-out atheist win an election. And we have had one politician who claims to be a Muslim win an election. So this, each of you can decide for yourself, is this a sign of progress or whatever? But again, the founders, though, they took for granted that most citizens were Christian, but to laws that restricted Catholics from running. Now, yeah, well, I want to say that John Kennedy was their only Catholic president, but he wasn't the first to run. In 1928, when my mother was 6 years old and my dad was 8, 1928, we had a Catholic run for president named Al Smith. And it's believed that his Catholicism got him a whole lot more votes than he otherwise would have gotten, owing to the fact that the Democrats had no chance to win anyway. The Republicans had a firm hold on the presidency thanks to World War I and Woodrow Wilson, which had made the Republicans unpopular. And then came the Depression that made them very unpopular. Yes?
I can't call his name. What was his name? The president was in the wheelchair. He had,
Oh, President Franklin Roosevelt. Operated in office.
Who was his assistant?
Oh, he had 3 vice presidents. His first vice president was Garnett. His second vice, Garnett lasted 8 years, and then Garnett retired and went back to Texas. His second vice president, Wallace, and the people turned again. Wallace slaughtered 1 million hogs to keep the hogs to keep prices up, to help increase. And he slaughtered these 1 million baby hogs, and this made a lot of people, it made it unpopular with a lot of folk. And also Wallace was known, with all respect, he was half communist, and this is not an accusation. This is just saying a fact. And Roosevelt thought, you'd better not run with Wallace. You see, Roosevelt wanted to run with either Wallace or Douglas. Instead, they picked someone who couldn't hurt him, some dark horse unknown. The man's name was Harry Truman. I got to tell this. Harry Truman had never met the president. So when they asked Harry Truman, will you be his vice? And okay, so they said, you got to go meet him. So Harry Truman went in to meet the president. And he came out of the meeting. The president was coughing badly and shaking like a leaf. He came out whispering to one of the president's top aide, hey, I don't think this man's going to last another 4 years in the White House. And the top aide, you keep that to yourself. If you want to get in office, you just keep that quiet. Harry Truman kept his mouth shut. And within a few months, Harry Truman was president of the United States. Yeah. That man didn't last 4 years. But anyway, all right, there's a few of these stories you pick up along the side. But anyway, religion did play a big part in American life, but Christian religion has played less and less of a role as time goes on, and especially the Supreme Court making decisions that some of them are in direct conflict with the Bible. Again, they make decisions, folks, that King George III would never have made, and they make decisions that hardly any elected Congress would ever make.